Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
Indeed. And so we're kind of breaking rules. You know, it's like one thing when we go, okay, DC character into another DC character, but if you're talking about like a Green Lantern character then a friggin' Superman character, there's a lot of distance between those two things. But we talked about Parallax last week, and we're talking about who this week, Alfie?
Sinestro, because I like to be thematic and fuck the rules.
Fuck the rules. So what made you want to talk about Sinestro, since you're not the Green Lantern fan here?
Well, out of all of Green Lantern lore, he's definitely the one I know the most about-ish, just because of when he turns up in things adjacent to that. And he's the one I'm most interested in, of just like, out of everything I've seen in Green Lantern, he's definitely the thing that stands out to me as a character that I feel like, so I used to feel was like above the rest of the work, but now it's just like, now that I know more, it's more like he's the most interesting gem and something that's more interesting to me now than it was before. And I feel like, again, when we talk about Parallax, it was kind of like we were dancing around Sinestro. So I kind of want to get into him as well.
You know, that's interesting, because I actually don't think that there's too much connection between the two of them, like outside of a necessary level, I guess I'd call it. But I feel like those are pretty distinct characters in a number of ways, like very distinct villains at least. And I do agree. I think Sinestro is... You know, actually, I'm going to have one of those nuanced opinions. I think Sinestro is one of the more potentially interesting characters in the Green Lantern universe, and rarely much of interest is ever done with him. I think he is one of those characters with just so much potential, and he just isn't really explored enough for my personal taste.
Well, that's disappointing to hear.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've read a fair amount, and like there's definitely like that surface level of like, oh, well, he did this in this story, and I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, it's cooler in concept and to explain it than it is to actually read the story. Like, oh yeah, at the beginning of the New 52, Sinestro became the Green Lantern again. It's like, oh, that sounds really interesting. It's over by like volume 1.5. And that's just kind of how I feel about him. But what like got you into the character then?
Well, my first big exposure to him was, of all places, as much as I've debunked it on this show and like said how much I hate the concept, was Injustice, the Year 2 storyline when Sinestro turns up and he's involved in that in a big way. He just really struck me in that as this kind of... I love the archetype like he represents in DC, and just in all fiction really. I always loved the friend turned bad. I always loved the hero that we thought was greater than all of us, but he had a deeper, darker side that no one really knew until it was too late, and it kind of fell, and now he's the biggest threat we've ever seen. Like, he's got that Anakin Skywalker kind of vibe to him. And I really find that interesting. And when he was in Injustice and he's playing our Superman, and he was in a position of like lesser power there, but yet he still managed to completely wrap around his finger and like bend him to his will to what he wanted to do, and just really struck me as an active villain in his goals, not someone who's going to sit back. He's actively going to try and create these circumstances that benefit his ideas, and his goals aren't those abstract. Because that's one of my problems with some Green Lantern villains is like Parallax. It's very abstract what his end goal is. It's like just kind of okay, yeah, that. Sinestro's got a very clear, this is how I think we can do our role much better in like his twisted mind. And I think that's really interesting to follow as a foil to an organization of police, basically. Like that's you could get some good commentary there. But yeah, that's basically why I like the character, and just, he's got a bitchin' design. I love the little pencil mustache. Like that's just, and he's got the widow's peak, so you know Ian's gonna like him.
Yep, that's what we've determined, is if a character has a widow's peak, then I automatically love them. No, you're definitely onto something. I think that Sinestro, again, he represents this really interesting idea for a villain. But then, like, for every injustice that actually explores that idea of the superhero gone rogue, you have like 6 DCAU Sinestro stories where it's like, you know how weird it is for me anytime I watch a DCAU episode and like Sinestro's in the Injustice gang that Grodd tries to set up, and it's like, Sinestro, he just really hates Green Lanterns. I'm like, no, that's like not even like part of it. He actually really respects the Green Lantern Corps. He's got like, I guess the way I'd compare it is like, you know, like Punisher hates like all the other Marvel superheroes except for Captain America. Like that. That's how Sinestro feels about the Green Lantern Corps. Like, he'll fight them and stuff, but he's got like this underlying respect for them at the end of the day. Except for Kyle Rayner. He hates Kyle Rayner.
So that's more like the Punisher will tolerate every Marvel superhero, but he just thinks Spider-Man's an annoying prick.
Pretty much. Kyle Rayner's kind of like the very, like, you know, he literally calls him Alley Rat all the time, and I love that. And then Kyle fucked his daughter, so, you know, got it back.
Nice.
Yeah. It still ended terribly, but whatever. As all Kyle's relationships do. No, but so like there's just so much Sinestro stuff out there that's like, oh man, this is a really cool idea for a character, but then he's like robbing a bank, and I'm like, no, what are you doing? Like, there's seriously, it's another DCAU episode where it's the one where Flash and Luthor switch bodies, and like Flash is trying to figure out what the Legion of Doom's plan is. And Sinestro straight says, it'll be the biggest gold heist in history. And I'm like, why the fuck is this dude helping? He's an alien, first of all. What good does gold do for him? Like, it's just, there's so much there that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, DCAU would like sometimes like give it like character defining depictions and do the characters really justice, like just look at their Batman, but then you get the Supermans and Sinestros.
I don't know, like the thing is, I'd say Superman is a different take, or is like a personal take, not the best, but like it's a personal take that you could buy, whereas Sinestro is like, I Bruce Timm and company just going, we don't know anything about this character and we're not going to bother to learn. But fucking Ken Jarreau, they'll throw in every goddamn thing they animate. It's amazing. Though, to be fair, like, they got a little bit better with Sinestro, the DC animated community. By the time you get to First Flight, he's pretty decent in that. I think that Green Lantern First Flight is a pretty decent depiction of Sinestro's character and his end goals. That one works a bit better. Like, particularly the moment when he there's this like great scene after a big chase of a criminal, and Hal kind of like lets him go or whatever, where Sinestro just like fucking destroys a junkyard, talking about how the chaos in the universe is spreading and he's the only thing that he's the only one that understands what needs to be done to stop it. And I'm like, yeah, that's Sinestro right there. Just this order obsessed militant. Sinestro's like the guy that runs a compound to prepare for Doomsday or some shit like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's particularly good in the DC universe, not just as like a Green Lantern villain, but because that question's always posed in DC is what happens when the superheroes go too far. Well, like Amanda Waller's whole argument is based on the fact that if you guys could take over, you could whenever you wanted. If you got the inkling to take matters further for our protection, for our safety, you could. And Sinestro is the villain who really should be like 100% champion the idea. He should be the one of the posters once they find out a bit. I know it's not an Earth problem, but still it applies. Is their greatest Green Lantern is doing exactly what we fear will do, and you have a Green Lantern on your team. How can we trust you? Like that kind of idea is he should be the poster boy for superheroes going too far. And I feel like where you're getting at him and what you're describing at him is basically like exactly how I feel about General Zod. Because they're very similar characters, and they seem to have the same problem, where they used to be great, they used to be friends with a certain character in the mythos, like a very important character, and when they're at their best, they're never mustache-twirlingly evil, even though they both have great facial hair. They're like always doing it for some purpose or some goal or something that they believe can help them achieve those goals. And it's meant to be more of a less than, oh, I've got to stop the evil bad guy of the week thing. It's more, oh, this is my friend, this is my brother in arms, and part of me understands why they're doing this, and that makes it even more horrible that I have to stop them.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and I think the major distinction exists between those two characters in that Sinestro has legs in a way that Zod does not. You know? Zod pretty much only has, like, the one story. Like, that's a big problem with a lot of Superman's rogues galleries. They really a lot of them only have, like, the one story. You only have one Doomsday story. He shows up and fights Superman. That's all you got for Doomsday. Same for Zod. Zod breaks out of the Phantom Zone and, you know, kind of destroys Superman's credibility. Inspires the fear in people. That's, like, pretty much all you can really do with Zod, unless you start getting really experimental and weird and it starts to, you know, get kind of out of control quickly. But Sinestro has legs in a way that a lot of those guys don't, because he can kind of always be there, always trying different schemes and stuff, and always falling further and further and further. He's got kind of like that Loki thing, I guess, you know?
Well, that's a good comparison, yeah.
Yeah, it's like he used to be there, everyone used to trust him, like, because Hal Jordan can be such a flat character, writers will often like to fall back on this, Hal Jordan's the chosen one dynamic, and I always hate that, but I do always love the idea that Hal Jordan's the greatest Green Lantern of his generation. Not because he's the greatest Green Lantern, but because Sinestro became evil. That's how I like to think of their relationship. Is Sinestro was just unequivocally the best of them at wielding the ring, and it's just that no one realized how far he was willing to go with it, and it's kind of crazy. And unfortunately, the only story that really takes a deep dive into what the hell Sinestro was up to is really bad. It's called Green Lantern 90 Days Part 2. And it's the sequel to Green Lantern 90 Days, which was Hal Jordan's new origin for post-crisis, in which he drove drunk and paralyzed his best friend. So, you know, that's just a great way to set up a character for all of us to love. And then he was serving 90 days in prison for it, because that's a realistic sentence for drunk driving that leads to permanent physical injury.
Well, it gets you that good-ass title, you know? That's what
Yeah. But, like, in that story, Hal and Sinestro go kind of, like, exploring the universe, and they end up on Sinestro's planet for a while. And, like, Hal kind of just goes off on his own and, like, wonders why everyone on the street is, like, super afraid of him as he's walking around in the Green Lantern uniform. and he has to kind of like tell the Guardians what happened, and they like put Sinestro on trial, and it's like, it is actually one of the more legitimately interesting things in the book. He was allowed to do it because he had no malicious intent behind it. He wasn't doing it because he wanted control. He wasn't doing it because he wanted to rule. He legitimately thought it was the best thing for his people, and so the ring's like moral programming didn't override him. And
that's interesting.
yeah, it's just a shame that the story sucks. Like, I legitimately cannot recommend that story, even though the premise is fucking perfect. But yeah, so like you get that like sense of everything I'm doing is justified. Everything, like, I'm the one who's right, everyone else is just crazy. And that's like, you know, what do you do to fight that? Because it gives your villain the same level of determination as your hero, right? And
I think that's particularly interesting when you pair it against the various Green Lanterns. Kyle, you obviously get the you're the new kid on the block. You're not my arch enemy. You're just his replacement. So I'm immediately going to think less of you until he proves against it kind of dynamic, which is always fun with successor heroes. And then how you got the like we were always friends, Jordan, like tragedy there, and like the ultimate brick wall basically, who is the only one in the universe Sinestro's cannot convince because he's too fucking stubborn. So that works with those two. An interesting one that's happened recently was in Scott Snyder's Justice League run, is because John Stewart's the main Lantern on that roster. And the first arc of that book is a Sinestro arc where he gets the ultraviolet spectrum and basically like takes over the population of Earth and makes it his new core. And John Stewart's inducted into that core because of all the guilt he feels over blowing up the planet as usual.
Of course.
but he gets over it in his story. But don't worry, I'm sure the next writer will immediately undo that. But Sinestro basically recruits him because, unlike Hal or Kyle, he's immediately like, no, you're an architect. You understand things need to be contained. You understand structure. You understand how to build something from a foundation. You get what I'm saying. And later on in the book, like John says after he's like rescued from like the ultraviolet spectrum from the rest of the League, he's like, you know, it did overpower my will and it did remove the Green Lantern ring, but I can't deny that I did agree with him on some points. And like that's interesting that I feel like Sinestro is such a versatile villain that despite the number of Green Lanterns, especially Earth-based Green Lanterns there are, he pairs off really well against everyone. I haven't read any stories with them, but I just imagine Sinestro, Jessica Cruz is like a perfect combination.
Yeah, given like how much she deals with anxiety and Sinestro's all about fear. Yeah, I can totally see that dynamic working. Gardner's too stupid to play off of anybody really well. Yeah, so like he's Batman. Except Batman. So he's one of those things. Sinestro for me is like one of those characters. Okay. You remember in I think it was the season 3 or season 4 finale of the Batman when there's like an alien invasion and like there's this shot of the aliens attacking Arkham Asylum and all the villains locked up in Arkham are like fighting back against the aliens and like there's even a moment where like Joker does it. He's like, "This is my city." I'm like, "Oh no, that doesn't." No, he'd just sit there and laugh. Like that's the Joker would be the least helpful person to like depend on, even if his own life is in jeopardy in event of an alien invasion. There's a great arc in The Flash by Grant Morrison and Mark Millar where it's like everyone on Earth needs to run so that we can save everybody, and like Joker would be the guy in his cell like, I think I'll take a nap, until they let it happen. Where Sinestro's the guy who's like totally gonna team up with the heroes in in those, like, you know, monumental moments. Sinestro's the one where he's practical enough to team up, and, like, the first chance he gets, he'd stab him in the back, but not to join, like, that level of threat. That's the thing for me, is Sinestro isn't really, like, the type where he's like, oh yeah, I'll join with this thing, unless he knows unequivocally for a fact he's going to be able to control it. But he would never be subservient to something that has that much potential for chaos. So, like, you know, if you do, like, a Darkseid invasion story, Sinestro will fight against Darkseid, because he's not that level of evil. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at things. Like, Sinestro versus Brainiac would be a thing that you could totally do, because that's just, it's too chaotic, the kind of destruction that Brainiac rings throughout the universe. But then you get, like, other stuff where it's like, you know, oh, this Vandal Savage wants to take over the world so that he can impose his will. Well, if he's willing to let me, you know, kind of police the state, I'll join him. Like, that is the kind of, like, interesting dynamic Sinestro creates as far as, like, team-ups go. Not to steal gold. Sorry, that just...
Yeah, it's like, it's not impossible you can put him on the Legion of Doom. He can actually work well there for different reasons. Like, currently he's on it just because Lex Luthor promises him access to, like, the spectrum he was researching before he even became a Green Lantern, like, way back in his origin. And it's like a retcon to explain his, like, black and purple outfit. But there's also, he's almost, I wouldn't even say he's an anti-hero, because he is a full-on villain, but he's like that villain, he's the villain who
he's lawful evil.
Yeah. That on the D&D spectrum. He's got that element of just, you know, when the chips are down, out of everyone, he's probably the most dependable, because even though he's fallen so far and everything he's done is deplorable and he literally runs a core of horror monsters, he still has a code. He still has some limits that he won't cross, because he does genuinely believe in what he's doing is right. And villains like that are always interesting, because the moment, like, he's obviously been, the moment you do the DCAU thing and make him just for the goal, you immediately lose any sense of the argument. You can just immediately shrug him off as, like, a crazy dude.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever Sinestro has those moments of being a hero, of being the guy who helps save the day, it immediately then brings in the hero's morals into question, because, like, well, he's not all bad.
Mm-hmm.
Is this, like, I guess that's what you could do, because it's disappointing to hear you say about, like, his planet has only been shown in that one real story, but I think you could do a legitimately interesting story with the Guardians and Hal Jordan and basically any other Lantern trying to reconcile with it. If you did, like, the Latveria thing, where, like, it's a utopia, where, like, they go to hit Sinestro's planet and it worked and everyone's fine, but it's, like, too fine. Like, there's a really great Doctor Doom thing where Doctor Doom arrives after fighting the Fantastic Four, and I could just imagine the scene with Sinestro, and the people of Latveria are clapping for him and everyone's cheering, and one of his guards goes to him and he's like, Victor Von Doom, Your Majesty, what would you like us to do? These celebrations are commencing fire. And he's just like, the claps will continue uninterrupted for an hour. The first one to stop clapping, take them away. So it's like one of those things where, okay, we've got everything's fine. There's the minimum wage here is fantastic. Everyone's living, no school children goes hungry, and no one's without an education in Latveria. Everyone's fine, but there's limits. There's things that undercut it just because of his ego. And I guess Sinestro doesn't really have that, but I think you could maybe swap the ego thing with just they're terrified still kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what really plays into the fear thing. And you mentioned like he builds a core full of horror movie monsters. Like quite literally, there are panels in the Sinestro Core War where artists just drew famous horror movie monsters. So you can see like a Xenomorph and a Predator as Yellow Lanterns. So it's very, very literal that like this is what inspired the Sinestro cores, these feeder monsters, and they're entirely just there as big guns. Like they're entirely there just to be things that Sinestro can deploy against certain Green Lanterns. Like there's a sentient fungus that he deploys against Mogo to weaken him. There's all kinds of stuff like that in the Sinestro Corps, and they're all very, very tactile choices. And what's kind of interesting about that is how many controls Sinestro built into his own rings that kind of just have come up over the years post Sinestro Corps War. Like there's an issue where Mongol tried to take over the Yellow Corps and make it the Mongol Corps, and Sinestro challenges him to a fight, and Mongol's got like 10 rings on, and Sinestro goes, good, then you're 10 times weaker to this. And he like says, execute Sinestro Corps order, blah, blah, blah. And like a bunch of yellow spikes just come out of Mongol's skin that were generated by the ring. Like they just like shoot, like it just created giant spikes inside his body. And he drops immediately. And then there's another moment in Godhead where, you know, Sinestro had been away from the Corps for a while because of being the whole getting reintroduced to the Green Lanterns thing. He'd been in the Corps, he'd been away from the Corps for a while, and like since his vision was introduce monsters as weapons, no one really got that was left to take over the Corps, so they just kept like bringing in more and more powerful, crazy people. And Sinestro's like, okay, well, it's time to see what these guys can actually do. So we're about to have this battle with these new gods. You guys go down planet side and really prove yourselves to me. And they're like, all right, we got this, Sinestro. And they start fighting the new gods army. And he's like, execute Sinestro Corps order, blah, blah, blah. And all the rings fucking self-destruct and just decimate the new gods army. He's like, yeah, I really needed to trim the fat from my Corps that had developed while I was gone. It's like, shit. It's so very practical and like ruthless to a level that's like really, really cool. And I think that really works for him as something to seed, because again, I mentioned Green Lantern First Flight. That has a pretty good moment where they go to interrogate this alien woman in a bar, and she can like there's like this weird orb thing that lets out a gas when you touch it, and he keeps making her touch it, like he's making her OD while he's interrogating her, like as a way to get information, and it's literally like physically killing her, and Hal's just sitting there watching the whole thing happen, and that's what kind of sparks him to get in a fight with Sinestro about it. And then there's also the Prisoner of Sinestro episode of Green Lantern, the animated series, where there's like this mind-hopping alien, and Sinestro's the one who picks up on it and goes, oh, okay, I know how to fix this. First, I'm going to damage the holding cell that we've got his main body in. Then I'm going to assert that we drain all the oxygen from the ship, so the Green Lantern characters can all survive because they got the ring auras. He can't. And so he's going to have to go back to his body, which I promise is the only place with air left in it. Except that he purposely made sure that there wouldn't be. And so he, like, forces the thing to suffocate itself. It's fucking demented.
Yeah, stuff like that is just those great moments that show you just... It gives you that justification too, like, say you're doing the story where, like, the hero's like, oh, he's got some points, he's helped us in the last event, like, the weekly event, he's proved himself, he used to be my friend, but then you just see shit like that, and you're just like, no, there's something wrong with this guy, and I really like peeling back the surface for that, because it doesn't necessarily mean all his heroic deeds are invalidated either. Sinestro, you can do flashbacks to as a Green Lantern where he's like, he lives up to that, where he's an even better Green Lantern than Hal Jordan. He's like completely on top of his game, saving lives. But then the shit you don't see chronicled in the legend books is the less than savory aspects of him. Because it makes him a more well-rounded character. It makes him more three-dimensional than a lot of comic book villains normally get their chance to be. Because in the moment you say in his backstory, like, I forget how. You're more Green Lantern than me, but I don't know how much you've read of like Silver Age stuff. Was he always a former Green Lantern?
I'm pretty sure that was always part of his backstory. I guess I don't know 100%, but I'd give like a good 82.5% that he was always a Green Lantern as part of his backstory, but it's probably like one of those things where, oh yeah, I used to be a Green Lantern, that's how I know how to use this yellow ring. Or some shit like that. It was probably like a little one-panel mention or something.
Yeah, but like again, stuff like that was just dropped in back in the day can be turned into something that immediately helps propel him than if he was just the Yellow Lantern. It gives him immediately something you have to elaborate on that. It requires a character arc, and I really appreciate that about in a villain, and Sinestro particularly. Your whole thing about how he can do, like, he's planned everything in his rings, like, if no one can betray him. I think that's really telling because, again, when I was looking into more Green Lantern stuff, there's something that always struck me was, oh, it's just called the Sinestro Corps. It's just his. That really helps. It helps separate it as, like, he's like Dr. Eggman, and, like, everything's just his weapon. Like, that's the level we are. He's got an army. But it's not like how he's not Sinestro's part of the Yellow Lantern Corps. It's like, no, these are his badniks.
No, like that's the best thing about like the name certainly, but the oath too. In blackest day and brightest night, beware your fears made into light. Let those who try to stop what's right burn like his power, Sinestro's might. So like he's like inserted himself as like the religious figure of the Sinestro Corps. Oh god, what's her name? Lysandra Dark was a character introduced so they could do like fun little like one-off stories about like the tales of the Sinestro Corps for like the origins for its members and stuff. And she had like a very Elvira thing, including the boobs. And she had like this just absolute devotion to Sinestro, and she was the keeper of the book of the Sinestro Corps. And like, so in her initial appearances, she's carrying around a book, but then at one point in her story, someone destroys the book as like a fuck you. She's like, oh no, that was just the backup. I'm the book. And she like removes her clothing and she's like etched the words of the book of Sinestro into her skin. And it's like really fucking creepy, but it gives you that sense of like, yeah, he has created this cult of personality around himself, like any good dictator would. It's just it creates a really fascinating character.
And on her back, in giant letters, it will be the biggest gold heist in history.
Oh man, it's like the parable of that time Sinestro stole the gold, but for the better of the universe.
It's his equivalent of Lex Luthor stealing 42 cakes.
Right. It pretty much is. It has that same level of like, why would Lex Luthor steal 42 cakes? Did I ever tell you about that issue of the Joker comic where he teams up with Lex Luthor?
No.
Okay. It's just this one really stupid moment that I think perfectly describes just how much of a genius Lex Luthor is. So like they need to get away from the cops, and they're at like a street fair. And so Luthor grabs like a 6-pack of canned sodas and like rigs them up to his legs and shakes them and opens them all at once to create like jet boots. Wrap your head around that.
12 level intellect, bitches.
Try that at home, kids. Oh yeah. No, but Sinestro's got all that cool shit just going for him, and it's like it's one of those things where it's super cool to explore tropes like that in fiction. The problem comes when like people start to get really into it in real life, you know? Like,
Oh,
Sinestro's
yeah.
got kind of like that Kylo Ren level shit, where it's like, no, this is a super fascinating fictional character. If you start applying this to real people, things become problematic.
That is just every fandom's got on, but I can just imagine. Oh no, I think the Sinestro Corps is right. The Green Lanterns are totally in the wrong. Like the Empire was right. Fans of Star Wars.
Exactly. No, I mean, you want like the real world version of Sinestro. It's the cop who like shoots somebody in the back of the head, right? Like that's just that's exactly the kind of like base for the Sinestro character. It's one of those things where it's really fun and interesting to explore in fiction, but like the second you start to make it more real, it does get really distasteful. So yeah, I guess the last thing I want to talk about before we conclude is just Mark Strong really could have played a great Sinestro if he had a better script.
Oh yeah, that dude is like 100% perfect casting for so many comic book characters, and I still haven't watched Shazam. But again, Dr. Sivana is such a fucking waste for that guy when he could have been like either the perfect Sinestro or the perfect Lex Luthor.
I guess I tend to agree with you there. Oh well. So yeah, that's really all I had on Sinestro. I guess we'll go ahead and go on to recommendations real quick. So for Sinestro, but not for the lore, I'll recommend Green Lantern First Flight. I'll also recommend the Sinestro Corps War. It's really a great story that involves him. And if you want kind of like the more mushy side of his character, he's got a really great moment in Godhead where he kind of like snaps Hal Jordan back into his shit, which is a pretty good moment, and I really won't spoil it. I'll just say read Godhead, and you get a great Sinestro moment out of it. Or actually two, because I already described one of them, so he's good as hell in that story.
For my ones, about three, the aforementioned Injustice year in year 2, I think that's a really solid outing of Sinestro.
Oh yeah, that is probably one of his best stories, actually.
The highlight of Injustice to me, I think that's where it's at its strongest, and that's where it really like hits the best climax. Really solid stuff from there. That was what got me interested in him in the first place. Then I'd have to recommend the first arc of the current Justice League run. And basically, Sinestro is popping his head in here and there in this. He recently got a Year of the Villain special, which I heard was quite good.
Yeah, that was a really good one-off.
So he's currently doing cool things at the moment in DC, which I think you could check out, especially that first arc, because that's the Sinestro-focused one. And I think he's really entertaining as like a global threat. And finally, something to look forward to in the future that just the solicit for it got me really, really excited is the Tales from the Dark Multiverse, Blackest Night. And the description of that reads that Sinestro becomes a half black, half white lantern.
That does look really interesting. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see how that ends up, but I'm there for it. I also will give kind of a soft recommend. I didn't really love it, but it did have good moments. And that would be Cullen Bunn's Sinestro series. I read bits and pieces of it, but couldn't quite get into it. But he had some good moments here and there in it, so give that a soft recommend. Alrighty. Oh, who are we going to talk about next time?
I don't know. Who are we going to talk about next time, Ian?
Fuck it, it's the DC show. We're going to talk about Dr. Psycho.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously timely. You just read that book, so I'm 100% ready for it.
I just read that book that's over a year old. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, we'll be talking about Dr. Psycho next time. Everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.